when Hannah Rowan walked out of Elias Whitcomb's stone house. Every servant on the back porch pretended not to watch. She carried one carpet bag, a black wool shawl and the tin seed box her mother had kept under the bed until fever took her. Hannah had worked in the Whitcomb kitchen for 3 years, scrubbing pots, keeping pantry accounts, and enduring insults disguised as instruction. Her father, Patrick Rowan, had once managed Whitcomb's North herd. He died owed wages and left no son to demand them. Hannah demanded it anyway. That was her first mistake in Mercy Ford. Her second was refusing Whitcomb's proposal that she marry his widowed nephew, a man twice her age with a drinking temper. Whitcomb smiled. A rich man did not need to raise his voice. He only needed paper. "Since you are so determined to stand alone," he said in his polished office, "I have decided to be generous." He slid a deed across the desk. 40 acres at Thistle Bend, an old claim east of town, a fallen porch, a dry-looking well, a barn split by weather and fields choked with thistle. "It is more than a kitchen girl could expect," Whitcomb said. "Take it, Miss Rowan, and make a life out of town." Hannah looked at the deed. She heard the hidden command beneath the gift. "Go far enough away that no one hears you ask questions." Is the title clear? His smile thinned. Clear enough for a charity case. She signed the receipt with a steady hand. By noon, a freight wagon carried her past the bank, the mercantile, the telegraph office, and every lowered voice on the boardwalk. By sundown, she reached Thistle Bend. The house leaned. The pump handle hung loose. A cottonwood had grown through the north fence. Wind moved through broken panes. Hannah set her seed box on the porch step. "Well," she said to the ruin, "he meant you for an insult." The prairie wind lifted her shawl. "Let us disappoint him." Mercy Ford had many kinds of laughter, but when word spread that Hannah Rowan had accepted Thistle Bend, the whole town laughed in the same direction. The farm sat 2 miles beyond the last windmill, where the land dipped toward a stony creek bed. An old German homesteader named Kruger had tried wheat there and failed. A widower tried corn and failed faster. Then Whitcomb bought the claim for tax debt and let it rot. The well water tasted of iron, but was not dry. The field was hard on top and damp below. The barn roof had lost 3 sheets of tin. 6 twisted apple trees stood half buried under wild plum and bindweed. Mouse nests filled the stove, and swallows owned the bedroom lintel. At mid-morning, a rider stopped by the broken gate. He was tall, sun-browned, and quiet, with a leather apron rolled behind his saddle. Hannah recognized Caleb Price, the town blacksmith, who had shod Whitcomb horses without laughing at the servants. "Miss Rowan," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "I came to see if the pump wanted mending." "Did Mr. Whitcomb send you?" "No." "Then why come?" Caleb looked at the pump, the sagging porch, the field beyond. "Because broken iron is easier to fix before it breaks a person." Hannah stepped aside. While Caleb reset the pump pin, she fetched water, swept glass from the kitchen, and took stock. 1 kettle, 2 cracked plates, 1 rusted hoe, 7 fence gaps, and 40 acres of public mockery. Before he left, Caleb pointed toward the creek bed. "If you plant, do not plant high." Kruger said water ran under that field in wet years. Kruger failed. Kruger planted wheat because every man in Kansas thinks wheat will redeem him. Soil may have had other ideas. Hannah watched him ride away and remembered her mother's seed box, beans, squash, onion seed, turnip, sorghum, and garden notes in a careful hand. For the first time since leaving Whitcomb's house, she felt something sharper than humiliation: curiosity. 3 days later, Hannah went to Mercy Ford for nails, lamp oil, and salt pork. False front stores stood shoulder to shoulder along Main Street, horse droppings dried beside wagon ruts. A Santa Fe freight whistle cried from the depot, and men turned toward it like the voice of money. At Doyle's Mercantile, Hannah placed 2 nickels and a list on the counter. Mrs. Doyle read the list as though it were a court accusation. "You intend to stay out there?" "I intend to eat out there first. Staying comes after supper." A few men near the stove chuckled, not kindly, but not cruelly either. Then, Elias Whitcomb entered. He filled the doorway in a gray coat, silver watch chain bright. Behind him came Vernon, eyes already red before noon. "Miss Rowan," Whitcomb said, "how industrious you look. Has Thistle Bend taught humility yet?" Hannah picked up her parcel. It has taught that a bad roof tells the truth faster than a fine ceiling. Vernon laughed. She will be back begging before the month is out. Whitcomb laid a paper on the counter. When that day comes, I will buy it back for $10, more than it is worth. The store fell still. Caleb Price, standing near the nail kegs, spoke without turning his head. A deeded acre is worth what the owner makes of it. Vernon sneered. Blacksmiths giving land lectures now. Caleb faced him. Only when drunk men give farming ones. The moment could have turned violent, but Hannah stepped between them because she did not want Whitcomb to own the story. I thank you for the offer, she told Whitcomb, but I have not yet heard what the land thinks of me. She walked out with nails under one arm and lamp oil under the other. That evening, gossip reached every porch. Some said Hannah had pride enough to starve on. Some said Caleb had looked too long. Some said Whitcomb had erred by giving a stubborn woman anything recorded in a county book. Whitcomb heard that last remark at the bank and stopped smiling. Hannah's first week at Thistle Bend was not romantic. It was blisters, smoke, splinters, and beans burned twice because the stove drew badly. She rose before light, patched windows with flour sacks, pulled thistle until her palms bled, and slept with a chair braced under the door. On the 7th morning, while clearing the pantry, she found a loose plank beneath a flour bin. Under it lay a leather tube wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a yellowed map, a receipt from the county recorder dated 1871, and 3 pages in German and English. Hannah read slowly, sounding out the tight script. Johann Kruger had not failed because the land was worthless. No one believed his method. The farm sat over a shallow seep from Prairie Dog Creek, and Kruger had begun a stone-lined trench for vegetables, orchard trees, and fodder. The receipt recorded a water filing made 17 years earlier, before Whitcomb fenced the upper creek for cattle. On the last page, Kruger had written, "The small farm can feed a town if the ditch is opened and the spring protected." Hannah read the sentence 3 times. Feed a town. That afternoon Caleb arrived with a repaired hinge and found her kneeling in the lower field, scraping dirt with a broken spoon. "You lose something?" he asked. "Maybe the opposite." Together, they followed the old map. Beneath grass and silt, they found flat stones in a line. Not a grave, not a wall, but a buried channel. Kruger knew water. Whitcomb knew this. Caleb's jaw tightened. Whitcomb knows every acre only by what it can be forced to do. That is not the same as knowing land. Hannah looked toward the upper pasture where Whitcomb cattle watered behind a locked gate. "If this filing is lawful, then I have a right to draw water." "You have a right to ask the county." "No," Hannah said, closing the map. "I have a right to prove it." That night, under a smoking lamp, she copied Kruger's notes beside her mother's garden instructions. 2 dead people began teaching her the same lesson. Poor ground was often misunderstood ground. Spring came to Kansas with mud on its boots. Hannah traded mending work for seed potatoes, eggs for a setting hen, and laundry for a second-hand plow blade. Caleb sharpened it and refused payment until harvest. "Bring me vegetables when you have them. And if I fail, then bring me the story. I like to know which mistakes cost most." So Hannah began. She did not plow the whole farm as men advised. She opened the lower field by hand, burned thistle roots, saved ash for potash, and laid brush windbreaks along the west fence. She planted sorghum where soil ran thin, potatoes where damp held, beans beside cottonwood poles, and onions close to the house because her mother said onions paid attention. When the old ditch filled after a May rain, water moved through it like a secret deciding to speak. Children came first to watch. Then women came with baskets and questions. Mrs. Doyle brought cabbage seed. Sophia Alvarez, who kept goats beyond the depot, brought pepper seed and taught straw mulching. Levi Carter, a black teamster, brought manure from the livery and accepted supper instead of coin. Mercy Ford still laughed but not as loudly. Caleb came on Sundays, when the forge was cold. He set fence posts, mended the stovepipe, and taught Hannah how to lift a gate without wasting strength. She taught him how to read a seed catalog as weather prophecy. At first their silence had been caution, then it became rest. One evening, after they finished shingling the chicken shed, Hannah found him watching the lower field. Rows of green had risen from the place everyone called dead. "You see it now?" she asked. Caleb nodded. I should have seen it sooner. So should I. You had an excuse. You were handed an insult wrapped in legal paper. Hannah smiled at the darkening rose. Then I suppose I planted it. By June, the insult had leaves. The turnips came first, lettuce followed, then peas, onions, potatoes and strawberries from 3 half-dead crowns near the orchard. The old apple trees bloomed late. Bees returned, so did customers. Mrs. Doyle bought greens for the hotel, the depot agent bought onions for track crews. A rail dining car cook paid cash for eggs and early potatoes. When Hannah drove her first wagon load down Main Street, the same men who had laughed stepped aside to look. Elias Whitcomb looked hardest. He had not expected profit, he had expected surrender. Now every basket on Hannah's wagon seemed to accuse him of poor judgment. He summoned the county clerk, Mr. Baines, to his office. That Rowan girl is using water from my creek. Baines adjusted his spectacles. Prairie Dog Creek is not yours in whole. My cattle drink above her line. And if her filing predates your fence, that will matter. If, Whitcomb said. Baines did not answer. Clerks survived by knowing when a rich man's question was a threat. The next week, Vernon rode past Thistle Bend with 2 hired hands. Their cattle broke through the west fence at dusk and trampled 3 rows of beans before Hannah and Caleb drove them out. Caleb wanted to ride straight to Whitcomb's ranch. Hannah stopped him with one hand on his sleeve. No, he did this. Then he wants anger. Anger leaves tracks he can use. She lit a lantern and walked the fence line. At the broken post, she found clean saw marks. She measured them with a torn apron strip, marked hoof prints in mud, and covered them against the sun. By breakfast, she was at the county clerk's office with Caleb, Levi Carter and Mrs. Doyle as witnesses. Whitcomb expected a frightened servant. He found a farmer with evidence. Still, power did not vanish because one woman had mud on her hem and truth in her pocket. 2 days later, a notice appeared on the courthouse door. Water rights hearing, the 14th of July. The hearing changed Mercy Ford's weather. Women who had bought lettuce from Hannah avoided her eyes. Men who owed Whitcomb money found urgent business elsewhere. His bank held mortgages. His grain elevator set prices. To speak for Hannah meant risking more than opinion. Then Vernon spread a sharper rumor. He told the saloon that Caleb spent too many evenings at Thistle Bend. By Sunday, Mrs. Whitcomb refused to share Hannah's church bench, and the preacher spoke on temptation while staring at unmarried women. Hannah sat through every word with her hands folded white. Outside, Caleb waited by the hitching rail. You should not come to the farm for a while, she said. His face closed because of them. Because your business is in town, and town tongues can ruin a man without touching him. Let them try. That is easy for a man with a forge and a vote. The words wounded him because they were true. Kansas had given women's school boards and temperance meetings, but a poor single woman still carried her reputation like a lamp in wind. Caleb looked toward the church doors where people pretended not to listen. I will not leave you to him. You will leave me the right to fight him without becoming your burden. For a moment, neither moved. Then Caleb removed a folded paper from his coat. I found this in old county tax books. Kruger paid filing fees through 1879. It may help. Hannah took it, and their fingers touched only long enough for the town to invent a scandal. That night she sat alone, reading every paper twice. Rain began after midnight, beating the roof and filling the ditch. Near dawn, she heard hoofbeats. By the time she reached the door, a rider was gone. A knife held a note to the porch post. Sell back the farm or watch it drown. Hannah did not sleep after the warning. At first light, she walked the ditch with a shovel and her father's unloaded revolver. At the upper bend, where Kruger's stones met the creek bank, she found fresh cuts in the earth. Someone had opened a crude gap to send the swollen creek straight into her lower field. If the bank failed, her potatoes would rot, her onions would wash out, and the hearing would become a funeral for every hope she had planted. She worked alone because pride had sent Caleb away, and fear kept the town quiet. She drove stakes, packed mud with her feet, and dragged sand-filled feed sacks from the barn until her shoulders shook. At the forge, Caleb heard from Levi that Hannah had missed a nail order. He left a half-finished axle cooling and rode through rain that flattened the grass. He found her waist-deep in brown water, trying to hold a plank across the cut. "Hannah, get the sacks from the wagon." He did not argue. That was the first mercy. Together they built a temporary brace, but the current pulled at every seam. Hannah slipped, vanished to her shoulders and came up coughing with both hands still gripping the plank. Caleb caught her by the waist and hauled her onto the bank. "You nearly died for onions." She spat creek water and mud for evidence. At that he understood. If the ditch survived, the water itself would testify. If the farm held, Whitcomb's claim that her filing was useless would collapse. By dusk, Levi arrived with 2 depot men. Mrs. Doyle came with coffee. Sophia brought dry blankets and cursed Vernon in Spanish until Hannah laughed through chattering teeth. Mercy Ford had not chosen a side all at once. It had begun by picking up shovels. On the 14th of July, the county courthouse smelled of wet wool, lamp oil and anxious farmers. Whitcomb arrived with a lawyer from Abilene, Vernon at his shoulder and 3 large maps. Hannah arrived in clean blue calico, hands still raw, carrying Kruger's tube, her mother's seed notes and her farm ledger. Caleb stood near the back wall. He had promised not to speak unless called. The room filled until men stood in the hallway. Water rights were never only water. They were cattle, gardens, kitchens, debt payments and whether a person had to bow to survive. Whitcomb's lawyer argued that the Kruger filing had been abandoned, that a lone woman could not maintain an irrigation claim, and that Thistle Bend had been improved by unlawful diversion from a cattle stream. Then he made his mistake. He called Hannah's work pretty garden labor. The judge, a tired man named Amos Bell, looked over his spectacles. "Miss Rowan, you may answer." Hannah rose. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "This is not garden labor, Your Honor. It is cultivation by recorded water filing, maintained ditch structure, crop ledger and witnessed repair." She laid out the documents: Kruger, S. 1871 filing, tax receipts through 1879, Caleb, S. county copy, and her ledger of repairs, plantings, sales and flood damage. Mrs. Doyle testified to buying produce. Levi testified to the sod fence. Sophia testified that the ditch stones were old, not new. Then Hannah placed 2 turnips on the judge's table. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. She did not smile. "Those were pulled yesterday from the field Mr. Whitcomb says cannot be farmed. I ask the court whether a rich man's opinion weighs more than soil, water, labor and record." For the first time in his life, Elias Whitcomb looked as if a poor woman had struck him without lifting a hand. The judge did not rule that day. He wanted the recorder's original book brought from storage, and he ordered both parties to leave the ditch untouched. Whitcomb walked out of the courthouse with the calm of a man who had lost the first round, but owned the building where the second might be held. 3 nights later, Thistle Bend's barn caught fire. Hannah woke to smoke and the crack of dry boards. Flames licked through the hayloft where she had stored seed sacks, tools, and crates for the county fair. The chickens screamed from their pen. She ran first for the animals, kicked open the coop, and dragged the milk goat clear. Then she saw the seed box on the workbench inside. Her mother's tin seed box. The one thing she had owned before Whitcomb, and before the farm. She tied the goat to the fence and ran back. Caleb arrived as the roof began to fall. He caught her at the barn door. "No. My mother's box is in there." "Then tell me where." "Left bench, under the window." He wrapped his coat over his head, but Hannah seized his arm. "There is a loose plank in the back wall. Kruger cut it for air. It opens outward." That knowledge saved him. Caleb crawled through smoke and passed out the tin box just as a rafter crashed onto the bench. By then, half the town had come. Men formed a bucket line. Women beat sparks from the roof. Sophia led the children back. Levi followed a fresh wagon track and found one of Vernon's gloves snagged on wire. At dawn, Whitcomb came to view the damage with an expression arranged for sympathy. Hannah stood before the smoking barn, soot on her face, the tin box under one arm. "You should sell now," he said softly, "before worse fortune finds you." Hannah looked past him at the blackened beams and the people who had helped save her house. "No, Mr. Whitcomb, worse fortune already came." She lifted the glove Levi had found, and it dropped this. Whitcomb's last mistake was believing fire ended a season. It ended Hannah's barn. It did not end the farm. For 2 weeks, Mercy Ford became part of Thistle Bend. Caleb, built a temporary shed. Levi hauled lumber for a future share of potatoes. Mrs. Doyle organized women to sort beans and mend sacks. Sophia brought manure, seedlings, and fierce certainty. The judge's ruling came the day before the county fair. The Kruger filing stood. Hannah Rowan held lawful use of the lower water, so long as she maintained the ditch and did not waste the stream. It should have been victory enough, but Hannah understood Mercy Ford better now. The town respected paper because it had to. It respected harvest because it could eat it. So, she entered the fair. On judging morning, her wagon rolled into town under patched canvas. In it were potatoes, braided onions, white turnips, red peppers from Sophia's seed, strawberry preserves, eggs packed in oats, and small golden apples from trees everyone had called dead. Whitcomb stood near the cattle pens, pale with fury. Vernon stood farther back with a bandaged hand and a deputy beside him. The agricultural judges praised Whitcomb wheat and a River Farm melon. Then they reached Hannah's display and grew quiet. Not because it was largest, because every basket told the same story: a ruined claim made orderly, a forgotten water filing made lawful, a poor woman's labor made visible. Judge Bell, acting as fair chairman, pinned the blue ribbon to Hannah's table. "Best diversified farm exhibit in Mercy County," he announced. The crowd applauded slowly, then harder. Mrs. Doyle wiped her eyes. Levi whooped from the wagons. Sophia crossed herself. Caleb stood in the dust with his hat in both hands. Hannah looked at Whitcomb. He had given her a farm to bury her. Now the whole town was standing around it in baskets. Autumn came gold over Thistle Bend. The new barn was smaller but straighter. The ditch ran clear between stone edges. The west fence had posts deep enough to outlast spite. Beside the house, Hannah planted 4 apple trees, one for her mother, one for Kruger, one for every woman told charity was a chain, and one for the future. Whitcomb's power did not vanish overnight. Men like him shrank by inches. The bank lent with more caution. Farmers read what they signed. The clerk made copies before papers could be misplaced. Vernon paid a fine after Levi's testimony and Caleb's insistence that rich blood still bled under law. By winter, the rail dining car bought preserves and potatoes from Thistle Bend. The hotel bought eggs. Families came for onions, cold frame greens, and advice. Hannah showed women how to mulch, read soil after rain, and keep a ledger no banker could sneer at. One evening, Caleb came with a hinge for the new root cellar. "You keep fixing my farm," Hannah said. "Your farm keeps giving me reasons." She watched him set the hinge, patient and exact. "Caleb, I will not be taken in as another kind of charity." He looked up. "I would not know how to offer that." "Then what are you offering?" He placed the screwdriver on the step. "Partnership if you ever want it. Time, if you do not know yet. Respect either way." Hannah looked across the fields. The farm meant to shame her lay under evening light, orderly, stubborn, alive. "Time," she said. Caleb nodded, and because he understood the gift, he did not ask for more. Years later, travelers in Doyle's hotel would hear how Elias Whitcomb handed a poor kitchen girl, the worst farm in the county, to drive her away. They would hear how she opened an old ditch, brought the soil back, stood before a judge with turnips for witnesses, and turned Thistle Bend into the finest farm in town. But the people who knew Hannah best told it differently. They said the farm had not changed because it was given to her. It changed because at last, someone stayed long enough to listen.